Stop absolutely everything you're doing and pay attention to every word for the next few minutes, because the soft landing narrative that the financial media tries to sell has just violently collided with mathematical reality. What I'm about to present isn't speculation, conspiracy theory, or cheap alarmism to generate clicks. It's a forensic analysis of data that the mainstream deliberately ignores to maintain the illusion of stability. While the news celebrates a controlled average default rate of 3%, they are operating a veritable statistical smokescreen that hides an exposed fracture at the base of the system. You are living in a bifurcated economy where the security you feel is based on aggregate averages that no longer reflect real-world solvency. And ignoring what's happening now isn't just negligence, it's financial suicide. The definitive proof that the crisis has already begun lies not in a future prediction, but in the raw and terrifying data from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis released in May 2025. In the 10% of zip codes with the lowest income in the United States, the canary in the coal mine of the global economy, the credit card default rate reached 22.8%. Understand the gravity of this number. This is not a technical recession. It is a localized economic depression that already surpasses the worst moments of the great financial crisis. We call this the statistical silver bullet, the irrefutable data that confirms that liquidity at the base of the pyramid has completely evaporated. While the stock market fluctuates at historical highs, disconnected from reality, almost a quarter of the economically active population in these regions has already suffered total financial collapse, unable to honor basic debts. To worsen this scorched earth scenario, the total outstanding credit card debt surpassed the historic mark of $1.23 trillion in the third quarter, an absolute record that signals the end of the line for discretionary consumption. The most alarming fact, however, is that 61% of these cardholders have been carrying outstanding balances for more than a year, trapped in a vicious cycle of compound interest that they mathematically cannot pay. The banking system knows this. Risk departments are in silent panic, but the mainstream media refuses to connect the dots so as not to cause mass hysteria. You are about to see the exact mechanics of how this localized collapse will inevitably contaminate the entire system and why your perception of security is the biggest trap that exists right now. To truly understand the gravity of the situation, you need to swallow the economic red pill and see beyond the monetary illusion the government projects. The central thesis we are witnessing is what I call the fatal bifurcation. The system has created two parallel realities that cannot coexist for long. On one side, we have an artificially rich economy, sustained by asset owners, inflated real estate, and a stock market doped up on liquidity. On the other, the real economy of wage earners and the middle class, which is already experiencing a scenario technically worse than the 2008 recession. The financial market is blind because it analyzes aggregate averages. But the average is a statistical lie when 40% of the population is drowning. Collapse is not a future event for these people. It is the air they breathe now, and this rot at the foundation is about to bring down the roof. The mechanics behind this disaster are cold, calculating, and above all, structurally inevitable due to the position the big banks have put themselves in. The banking system is mathematically cornered, trapped in what insiders call the usury trap. Understand the broken engineering. Regional banks and even large conglomerates are sitting on gigantic unrealized losses in treasury bonds and a growing black hole in the commercial real estate (CRE) sector. To avoid insolvency and cover these capital shortfalls, they desperately need quick and liquid cash flow. The only remaining source of this flow is you, the consumer, through revolving credit card interest rates. They have turned the average citizen into collateral for their own failed bets in the bond market. This is where the machine grinds the bone. The average interest rate, APR, for interest-bearing accounts has reached an insane 22.3%, with new offers nearing 24%. This is not normal. This is the price of institutionalized usury. Banks operate under a catch-22, an unsolvable paradox. They cannot lower interest rates to 15% to alleviate the consumer, as this would destroy the profit margin necessary to absorb the capital losses I mentioned earlier. They are forced to keep interest rates in the stratosphere to survive accounting-wise today, even knowing that this guarantees the financial death of the client tomorrow. The banking system has become a parasite that needs to kill the host to avoid starvation, creating a suicidal dynamic that cannot end well. The practical result of this mechanism is a negative feedback loop that acts like a siphon, draining society's liquidity at record speed. High interest rates inevitably generate more defaults. The increase in defaults forces risk departments to keep interest rates high to compensate for the risk premium, which in turn generates even more defaults. It's a classic death spiral. We are seeing the spread, the difference between the Fed's base rate and the rate charged on your card, at the highest levels in history. When banks charge crisis prices in times that the government calls peace and prosperity, it's because internal panic has already set in on the trading floors. They know that the consumer credit model has broken down, and they are just trying to extract as much value as possible before the implosion. This predatory extraction of resources from the base of the pyramid functions exactly like a clogged pipe in a skyscraper. Pressure is building up in the lower pipes, low-income and middle-class consumers, while the upper floors, the stock market, still have running water. But physics is unforgiving. When the base bursts, the flow stops. The American consumer, responsible for 70% of GDP, is not just slowing down. They are becoming systematically insolvent. Without consumption from this base, which now pays interest instead of buying products, the corporate revenues of S&P 500 companies, which today seem invincible, will evaporate in the next earnings cycle. The liquidity that kept the wheel turning has been diverted to pay debt service. Therefore, the security you feel when looking at your account balance or the stock market index is a temporary mirage, a residual effect of an engine that has already been switched off. The crisis transmission mechanism has already been activated. The 22.8% default rate in the poorest zip codes is not their problem. It is the first domino in a kinetic chain that will bring down discretionary consumption, then corporate profits, and finally, employment. The system has no tools to fix this without causing massive inflation or deflation. The trap is set, the trigger has been pulled, and most people are still debating which movie to watch this weekend, completely oblivious to the tsunami of insolvency that is already covering the beach. The most dangerous and costly phrase in financial history is, "This time it's different." However, those who study the anatomy of economic disasters know that history doesn't repeat itself. It rhymes with terrifying precision. What we are witnessing in the 2025 and 2026 data is an exact mathematical echo of the months leading up to the 2008 collapse, and in many respects, the prelude to the Great Depression. In all these events, the official narrative was one of solid fundamentals, while the foundation rotted. The arrogance of today's markets, which ignore record defaults at the base of the pyramid, is a faithful mirror of the complacency of 2007, when the financial elite said that the subprime problem was contained and would not affect the real economy. We know exactly how that story ended, and those who believed in the containment of risk saw their wealth evaporate in weeks. We are experiencing a surgical reenactment of the 2007 scenario, but the toxic asset has changed address. Back then, defaults began with subprime mortgages in the outskirts of Florida and Nevada, far from the eyes of Wall Street. Today, the new periphery is credit cards and auto loans for the working class. The mechanism is identical. An asset class considered safe is suddenly exposed as toxic waste due to the inability of the end borrower to pay. Today's Chicago 22% is yesterday's Florida condominium. Banks, once again, are leveraged on promises of payment that are no longer worth the paper they were printed on. To ignore the direct correlation between the collapse of personal credit today and the collapse of banking tomorrow is to deny the very physics of the financial system. The brutal lesson history teaches us is that systemic risk never remains isolated on the periphery. It always migrates to the center with exponential violence. In the 1920s, it was margin debt. In the 1980s, corporate and savings debt. In 2008, housing. Now, it's unsecured consumer credit. When the consumer at the base collapses, and the data shows that they already have, they stop buying products from companies listed on the S&P 500. This instantly transforms a bank credit crisis into a corporate profit crisis, bringing down stock markets that today seem untouchable. There is no historical exception to this pattern. When liquidity at the base dries up, the top of the pyramid collapses soon after, dragging down with it all those who failed to read the warning signs. Those who waited for the official announcement of the 2008 recession were already financially dead when Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. History is unforgiving to those who hesitate. The signs we see now, record debt, predatory interest rates, and a complete disconnect between the stock market and the real economy, are the same sirens that sounded before every major wealth-destroying event of the modern century. If you think the government or central banks have the situation under control, remember they said the same thing in 1929 and 2000. The window of opportunity to protect yourself before liquidity is locked is closing rapidly. If you ignore this irrefutable historical pattern, you are not being optimistic. You are voluntarily positioning yourself as the exit liquidity for the big players who are already moving to safety. If you still believe that the Federal Reserve or the government will come riding a white horse to save the economy with yet another injection of liquidity, you are falling into the most dangerous cognitive trap of this decade. The brutal truth that central bankers discuss only behind closed doors is that the conventional toolbox is empty and broken. This time, they are cornered in an absolute mathematical checkmate, trapped between the cross of runaway inflation and the sword of systemic bank insolvency. In 2008, they could print trillions because inflation was dead. Today, any abrupt move to save regional banks or the indebted consumer will instantly reignite the inflationary fire, destroying what little credibility remains in fiat currency. They have lost the privilege of action without consequence, and now any solution they try to apply will only accelerate the collapse of a vital part of the structure. The scenario is a game theory nightmare where all options lead to loss. If the Fed decides to pivot and lower interest rates to save credit card holders and the commercial real estate market, they will effectively be signing the dollar's death warrant. This would trigger a secondary inflation wave far more violent than that of 2021, eroding the purchasing power of the middle class and generating immediate social unrest. On the other hand, if they keep interest rates high to protect the currency and combat inflation, they guarantee the explosion of bank balance sheets, transforming unrealized losses into real bankruptcies and global financial contagion. There is no soft landing when you have to choose between sacrificing the currency or sacrificing the banking system. It's a Sophie's choice, where the ultimate loser is always your unprotected assets. Furthermore, We are witnessing the terminal phenomenon known as fiscal dominance, where public debt has become so monstrous that monetary policy has lost its effectiveness. The U.S. government is paying over $1 trillion a year in debt interest alone, an amount that exceeds the entire defense budget. This creates an inescapable vicious cycle. To pay the interest on old debt, the Treasury needs to issue new debt, which increases the supply of bonds and pushes rates upward, requiring even more currency issuance. The system has entered a self-perpetuating death spiral, where the only mathematical way out is aggressive currency devaluation to pay off debts with money worth less. Institutions are no longer the guardians of stability. They have become hostages to their own fiscal irresponsibility, accumulated over decades. The great illusion is thinking they will let the system collapse in a disorganized way. The real plan is much more sinister and involves total control. When liquidity dries up and banking panic becomes unsustainable, the solution presented will not be the free market, but rather the implementation of draconian capital controls and, inevitably, the introduction of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. They will use the crisis they created as a pretext to centralize money, offering bailouts conditioned on acceptance of a system where every transaction is monitored and algorithmically allowed or denied. The institutional trap is not an accident. It is the closing of a circle where financial freedom is exchanged for false digital security, and those positioned within the traditional banking system will be the first victims of this modern confiscation. Therefore, understand that there will be no bailout for you, only for the system. The large corporations too big to fail will be absorbed or nationalized, and central banks will change the rules of the game mid-match to protect the political and financial elite. Inaction in the face of this scenario guarantees being crushed by the gears of a forced monetary restructuring. The system is not broken due to incompetence. It is functioning exactly as it was designed to transfer wealth from the productive base to the parasitic top during crises. Expecting the architects of the disaster to fix the foundation is the ultimate mistake. The only rational way out is to assume full responsibility for your own financial sovereignty before the exit doors are permanently welded shut by the emergency decrees that will surely come. Now that you understand the mechanics of the trap, fear must give way to tactical pragmatism, because chaos is the greatest wealth transfer mechanism in history for those who position themselves before the bubble bursts. The first and most urgent move is building your sovereignty shield. You need to withdraw a considerable portion of your capital from the traditional banking system and allocate it to real reserve assets, specifically physical gold and Bitcoin under your own custody. Understand that, in a bank solvency crisis, the balance on your bank screen is not money. It is merely a promise of payment from an insolvent institution. By owning assets that are not anyone's liability, you protect yourself against the bail-in and the aggressive devaluation that the Fed will be forced to print to rescue the system, ensuring that your purchasing power survives the liquefaction of the dollar. The second move is maintaining attack liquidity through very short-term Treasury bonds, the so-called 1-3-month T-bills, avoiding bank deposits that exceed government insurance limits. While the market panics, you should hold the equivalent of 6 months' living expenses in instruments that offer immediate liquidity and sovereign security, allowing you to take advantage of buying opportunities that will arise when the prices of quality assets plummet. This cash-in T-bills strategy acts like a fire extinguisher. You don't want your money stuck in a regional bank exposed to commercial mortgage or credit card debt when the doors close. Having liquidity when no one else does is what separates the survivors from the new millionaires who emerge in every depression. Finally, the third move is the asymmetric attack through short positions in sectors exposed to consumer insolvency. For the sophisticated investor, the strategy consists of using put options against companies that rely exclusively on unsecured credit or regional banks with high exposure to subprime credit card and vehicle loans. When unemployment starts to rise, the next inevitable domino in this chain, these stocks will lose value at a speed that the current market has not yet priced in. Furthermore, at the height of the collapse, there will be an opportunity to buy distressed quality debt for pennies on the dollar. The goal is not only to protect what you have, but to use the downward flow of the system to multiply your capital, positioning yourself against the fragility of a model that is already mathematically doomed. This dossier I've just opened before you isn't just another economics video. It's a survival map for a territory most people still refuse to acknowledge exists. The silent crash isn't an event that will go unnoticed for long, and the speed at which information transforms into panic will be devastating for those unprepared. My mission here is to provide the necessary intelligence so that you don't become just another insolvency statistic in next year's report. The system counts on your ignorance and inertia to fuel the final sell-off, but the simple fact that you've followed this analysis this far already puts you in a strategically advantageous position compared to the masses. To continue receiving this level of forensic analysis and monitor the unfolding of this crisis in real time, subscribing to this channel is the logical and necessary step. We are not here to talk about superficial investments or short-term tips, but to decode the tectonic shifts in geopolitics and systemic finance that will shape the coming decades. By becoming part of this community, you cease to be a passive spectator of your own ruin and become part of a group that understands the urgency of acting while windows of opportunity are still open. Social media algorithms often try to hide this kind of inconvenient truth, so be sure to activate all notifications to ensure that the next piece of this puzzle reaches you before the market reacts. The urgency of this moment demands that you break free from paralysis and begin questioning everything you've been told about financial security. The 22.8% default rate in Chicago and other major centers is not an isolated number. It's a cry for help from an economy that has reached its physical debt limit. We are here to monitor every domino that falls, from the tightening of bank credit standards to the first major institutional bailout that will signal the end of the dollar as we know it. Your presence here is crucial so that we can build an intelligence network that withstands the noise of traditional media and focuses on what really matters, preserving your freedom and your assets in the face of the inevitable. I want you to look now at your financial reality and your current strategy with brutal honesty, stripped of any blind optimism. Given the facts we've presented, the 22% interest rate trap and the clear insolvency at the base of the pyramid, what is your biggest fear regarding the banking system today? Do you feel your capital is truly safe where it is, or have you already begun to feel the earthquake that the data is pointing to? Leave your answer in the comments below, because this debate is what allows us to understand the depth of the social and financial fracture we are facing. Your experiences and local observations are valuable pieces for our ongoing analysis of the real health of the economy. The time for speculation is over, and the time for tactical preparation has begun, and every decision you make in the coming weeks will have repercussions for the next 10 years of your life. Don't wait for the news to report the collapse to start protecting yourself, because by then, liquidity will have already vanished, and the doors will be closed to the average citizen. Keep following us to understand how to navigate the murky waters of currency devaluation and global debt restructuring. The system is failing by design, but you don't have to fail with it. See you in the next intelligence report, where we will take the next step in understanding this systemic spiral that has only just begun to gain momentum.